you for joining us today for the What Sales Can Learn From interview series. I am your host, Carol Mahoney, the founder of Unbound Growth. Now, if you're like me and believe that everything is selling, then you know that selling is a part of everyday life. Whether you're in a traditional sales role, or if you're an entrepreneur who's trying to get investors or hire employees, or even if you're an employee who is trying to convince others of your ideas, abilities, and vision, we are all in sales. And if we're all in sales, we should be able to learn from each other. To truly learn, we need to look outside of our own world to get a different perspective on our own. That is why once a month, I will be talking with sales experts in other industries and professions and asking them to share with you how they've tackled tough challenges so that we can learn from their experiences and apply it to sales. Here we go. Our guest today is Stephen Drum. He is a combat-tested Navy SEAL and senior enlisted leader with 26 years of experience leading and developing high-performance teams. He trained and led U.S. and foreign partner special operations forces on high-risk and strategically vital missions across the globe, including combat missions in Iraq and Afghanistan. Stephen recently co-developed and currently teaches warrior toughness training for the U.S. Navy. And he's personally trained thousands of elite military soldiers and Navy SEAL candidates, helping them succeed in some of the most demanding combat operations and training courses in the world. As a speaker and consultant, he now helps individuals and organizations such as CDW and Horizon Pharma develop leadership and performance strategies so they can plan, prepare, and execute at the highest level when it matters the most. Stephen, thank you so much for joining us and sharing all the expertise that I know you have with sales professionals.
Thank you so much for having me, Carol. I appreciate it.
And we've had lots of different conversations about this, but I have to tell you that the first time I heard you speak, I sat up straighter in my chair and thought to myself, this is the one thing that I hear nearly every sales professional ask, and at every level, whether it's a salesperson, a manager, or an executive, and that is, how can I be better prepared? So I'm going to ask the obvious question first. Why do you believe that preparedness is so important?
Yeah, Carol, I think whether I'm talking about leadership, whether I'm talking about performance, or talk specifically sales, the one common theme that I try to articulate is the need to be able to respond versus react, to respond with a trained action or a trained behavior rather than just react. Because when we don't know our material so well, when we don't know what we're going to do next, we end up being flat-footed. And so we end up saying something that we didn't want to say or missing to say something that we should have said or done. And then we find ourselves not being able to deliver our best performance in that critical space, that critical situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is the thing that's happened is a salesperson or even a manager or a leader will find themselves in a situation where they have that gut-wrenching realization that I'm not ready for this. And the impact that that can have throughout an organization is, it's huge. So let me ask the opposite question for you is, because I've heard this as well, is that over preparation can be bad. Is there such a thing as too much preparation?
Generally I'd like to say no. There are times, when the SEAL teams where we do so much shooting, we go through our tactics so much over and over again that at a certain point you reach that phase where now you're starting to just go through the motions. You start to become a little less engaged, and now you are potentially developing bad habits or bad behaviors. But I would say for most of our audience here, I would say 90% of the time, no. We need to constantly be able to say, yes, we can do that much more. We can refine our craft that much better. But there is a distinction we need to make between being hungry, being able to not be satisfied with the status quo, always being able to deliver something that much better, with going into a situation not feeling confident and not feeling prepared. There's a big difference. This is where we need to kind of take our cues from performance psychology a little bit and develop a little self-talk statement that says, you know what? I put the work in. I'm ready. Whatever obstacles land in my path, I'm still going to be able to go around them because I know my stuff and I'm going to succeed and I'm going to win.
Yeah. So it's less about having the perfect script and the perfect plan, because you can't anticipate and prepare for everything that might happen in a conversation, for example. But you can practice different scenarios, which is one of the things that I think you just mentioned. Is there's a lot of practice that goes into this before you enter into a field situation, and you're actually drilling those things that might happen. Is that about right?
Yeah, 100%. You are, one of the things that we talk about is being brilliant on the basics. So that is the fundamental mastery of all the most basic aspects of your craft. And so whether it be, your business model, whether it's your product, and also to include your competitors' business model and products, is you need to know that in your sleep, because you don't want to be thinking of that when all of a sudden somebody throws a question that you haven't anticipated. You need to constantly be so comfortable with all those basic fundamentals, that basic knowledge, that you're able to just try to stay 2 steps ahead of the conversation, of the discussion, of the situation, and be able to totally be present and engaged in order to respond with that right action, with that right verbal response.
I'm so glad that you said that, because that is one of the things that I find that I say a lot to salespeople as well, is you can't script everything that's going to happen, but knowing the basics is important. And I've even gotten some pushback from that, where I'm keeping reinforcing the basics, and some people will say, well, people who are veterans who have been doing this a while, they don't need to keep refreshing the basics. They should know these by now. But it sounds like what you're saying is that's actually a constant refining and mastering the basics that actually gets you to that next level, not anything complicated.
Well, for example, we come back from a combat deployment where we're running around at a very high level with our hair on fire, doing things, doing speed and maybe getting a little sloppy. When we come back to start our next training cycle for our next deployment, we break everything down to absolutely the crawl stage, down to the basic fundamentals, and we drill on those. Mm-hmm. And so we do that over and over again. And I think in terms of being prepared, one of the things you mentioned is what we call contingency planning, is that we are always considering what happens when things go off a script. And we can't always anticipate every possible, course of action that could happen. But when we have the mindset that is always thinking about the what if, that it's a mindset that enables us, that creates an ability to think faster on our feet, and mm-hmm. to be able to just to not be rattled when things happen that we hadn't completely expected.
So there's this question that's coming to mind, and I'm a huge Patriots fan, in case you couldn't tell from the Patriots glass in the corner. And one of the things that I love is the amount of practice and drilling and breaking down of the past game that they do by watching game tape and those kinds of things. And then going back, and they break it down to the fundamentals of what's going to make a great play actually happen, and how do you work in those contingencies. So what I'm hearing is that it sounds like a lot of salespeople that I encounter, they spend a lot of time in preparation, what they call planning. They need to do a lot of their research and these things. But what I find happens is that they reach a point where they are using that as a reason not to take action. And we don't really always have that choice, because what I'm hearing you say is you're going to execute on this particular operation or conversation or opportunity. And then you're going to go back and look for the ways to refine that. Like, it's never a place where you've got it nailed down and it's perfect, but it's continuous.
Well, and that's why one of the biggest things, and we can discuss the model that I developed for the Navy, but one of the most critical aspects of that model is what we call the reflective piece. And, we have a process in the military we call AAR, after action review. And it's that comprehensive process where we are taking the lessons learned, but we're doing it in such a way that let's say, for example, we executed poorly. We're going to free the negative emotional baggage from the value of that experience. And we're going to pull that experience, we're going to pull the value from that experience with the express purpose of feeding it back in to our next preparation phase. And so that's what, every time we look at something, we look to say, all right, how can I use this for next time? And not get complacent because we did well and just say, heck with it, and not to equally be mired down with regret because, something went poorly for us. It's just get the value and flush away all the rest.
And this is something that at a leadership level is absolutely critical. But do you also find at the individual contributor level that this is also important? Is there any difference?
Not really. As an organization, you need to be able to have a deliberate process for the critical assessment and analysis of the things that happen to us, and be able to kind of extract the value, put it in a document, disseminate it to the rest of the sales force. But then at the individual level, you need to have that as well. After every key milestone, key event, whether it's a daily call, whether it's a weekly reflection, or whether it's just routinely, just stepping out of that noisy traffic to say, hey, is what I'm doing effective? What can I be doing better? Okay, and are my actions, behaviors aligned with my intentionality, with my original purpose in doing what I'm doing? And we have to do that, because sometimes if we don't, then we are not able to deal with when conditions changes, when the market changes, when priorities in our own lives change. And so we just, again, it's always using the value of your experience to inform your future steps, organizationally or individually. It's pretty much the same in my book.
Speaking of books, have you ever read the book Who Moved My Cheese?
I haven't. I probably should have, because I've heard about it so many times.
It's funny. Well, so it's written like a childhood's kind of tale, and it's a story of two mice. And don't ask me to remember the names of the mice. I should, but one mouse, they're both fed cheese every single day, and they get used to that pattern. And one day the cheese stops coming, and one mouse says, "Well, I'm going to sit here and wait, and they're going to come back and give me my cheese because I deserve to have this cheese." Versus the other mouse who has his sneakers around his neck and says, "We need to find new ways to get more cheese." And he never takes his sneakers off his neck. He never gets comfortable or settled in what the status quo is. He's always looking for what is going to happen next. And as you're describing it, the book came to mind. So I'm going to add that as a list of recommended books to read for all of our listeners. Now, in organizations, well, actually, let me ask you this, because it's one of these things that we all know that we should do, right? We know we should eat right. We know we should exercise. We know we shouldn't drink too much, but we still do them. So we all know that we should be preparing more. So why don't we? What's the hang up? What's getting in our way?
Well, I feel like, there's probably several reasons for this. And one is, we become so busy in our lives. Let's just be honest. We've got the professional aspects, the administrative tasks, that are all the things that are involved with us actually not doing the specific thing that we're supposed to be doing, all the other associated things. And then we have, the social media aspects, if we have our own business and we're trying to get out there for that. But then we also have the work-life balance, is being able to say, all right, I've got to spend just as much time and be present with my family as I am with being present and effective at work. And sometimes, unfortunately, the preparation piece, we just don't recognize the value and place it high enough on top of our list. As well as the things we talked about before, sometimes we just get complacent, right? What worked for us in the past, what worked for us yesterday is sure to work for us tomorrow. And so we kind of take our foot off the gas a little bit, only to find, one day something happens that we hadn't anticipated, and we're not sharp and we're not focused, and we can't deliver the performance that we need. Mm-hmm. And something probably more tragic is when we do recognize the value of preparation, and we are committed to putting the time in, but because we don't have a deliberate and a thoughtful process for preparing, sometimes we get to that clutch moment and we realize we haven't prepared properly. We haven't prepared in the right way with the right knowledge. And so again, we find ourselves unfortunately underperforming in that situation.
So can you tell us a little bit more about that? What are some of the steps or things that we need to do to prepare more? And the second question to that is, how much time do we need to go through these steps? How do you calculate how much time is enough time to prepare and when it's not enough?
Well, to your last question, a lot of that unfortunately sometimes goes into the reflective piece. And when I say reflect, it's based on our own performances too. But we can also reach out to get the value, to extract the value from other people's experiences. And using that as, when we research how we're going to do something better, we're looking at people who already do that well and taking that information, using it to help prepare. And the things that we do well in the military, we're able to do so because we have these comprehensive and these deliberate and consistent processes for everything that we do. And like I said, the four-part mindset that I developed to create tougher sailors in the Navy, that first piece of that is the commitment piece, is the intentionality piece. Know why you're doing what you're doing, and knowing that the daily behaviors and actions need to be aligned with that purpose. And when you prepare, it's with the right knowledge and the right skills, but you're also pairing that with the mental game. So you're using some performance psychology, such as self-talk, such as the mental rehearsal that we talked about, visualizing the things that are going to happen to us and living that moment before actually even doing it. Things such as mindfulness to maintain our focus and self-awareness when we need it most in the clutch. And then when we're actually in the execution phase, we're considering three things. First is our ability to be in the moment and stay focused and engaged, but also being able to have situational awareness, to be able to read the room, read the people, read the situation, and make sure that that informs our next steps. And lastly, we need agility. We need to always be in the mindset that, hey, what's going to happen next? What could happen next? And then lastly is that reflection piece is, okay, what happened and how do I have that deliberate process for using that to better my next performance? In terms of the time, that's tough to say. And that's, of course, going to be different. And when you really build that whole roadmap and that plan and you rehearse and you walk through all the things that you're going to do, hopefully that reveals some of the things that you need more work in and some of the things you're actually doing pretty well. And, unfortunately, sometimes you just got to go through it with as much confidence as you can bring because of the preparation you've done, and be ready to take those lessons learned and be even better the next time.
And one of the things, too, that you talked about there was rehearse. And this is something that I say to salespeople all the time, which is followed by two very hated words in sales, which is role play. And my reasoning for doing role play, now I call it practice or rehearsal or simulation. You give it a different word, maybe we'll have a different mindset towards it. But what I say to them is that, well, actually what they say to me, the reason that they hate role play is because it's not real. A lot of times they're put into role plays where it's scripted. You say this and then I'll say that. And it's not what actually happens in the real world. What are some of the ways that you've learned that leaders can help create the kinds of environments that are more realistic to what they're going to be in so that they can practice in those environments? How do leaders help to create those environments?
Well, I mean, it's funny, and I've heard that so many times that my friends that are in sales, they hate the role playing for, exactly the same reasons that you said. For me, I probably take, somewhat cynical view to that response because it's everything that we do. Mm-hmm. Everything that we do when we train is based upon role playing. We're constantly doing that because it is the only way to prepare. There's no other way to prepare than to do role playing and simulation. For those leaders that are trying to look at making their role playing more effective is to really slice it, to make it to be more creative in the delivery of that process. And one of the things is, when you go through is okay, you're using two employees, two salespeople, and one person is the prospect or client, and the other person is is actually in their sales role. And so you're going through and you're asking this person to kind of artificially contrive these responses when that's really not what their role is, when maybe instead, as Mike Ganino taught me, is instead just sit there and listen to what you hear. And I had a friend was telling me about the last role-playing session that she did at her last conference. And she said, they just give you this script when not really allowing us to kind of say, hey, let's put this in the context of how I would drive this conversation. And I would say, give your people the freedom to be able to work creatively with that sales narrative, with that sales agenda, and say, all right, you're the doctor. Here's what I would say. What would you say back to me? It's just to let them own the process instead of just really forcing it down people's throat in an exactly scripted form.
Do you ever run across situations whether you're in the Navy or leading teams and leadership on how to do these, have you ever found that, like, for example, a salesperson, and a lot of times when I'm coaching them, will try to trip me up? And I love it when they try to trip me up because that's what I know. These are the real things that they're hearing. These are the real objections that they're getting. And so not throwing them softballs. Is there a way to do that managers can do that so they're not, discouraging them? Or is it something where they have to slowly build them up to that point? Where does that play a role?
At the end of the day, when you have concluded that particular exercise, you have got to get that person moving out. Their steps away from that exercise need to be that of confidence. Yes, this was beneficial. I feel more confident. So you've got to be very, as the facilitator of that exercise, you've got to be very careful. You've got to be, I love what you said about throwing hurdles in there, and that's absolutely critical. But at the end of the day, their last taste of that exercise has to be of knowing what right looks like, of knowing what the right way is. And so as you go through, the things that we do when we train is we make sure that, yes, here's what right looks like when nothing bad happens. Here's how you execute this perfectly. Let's get those reps and sets in. Okay, now let's progressively start injecting more stressful situations, injecting more hurdles, more challenges. Okay, and you push them and you certainly ramp up till they start to kind of flounder a little bit. Then you back off that throttle and you revisit. You build them back up with, okay, let's revisit these steps and give them the confidence. Okay, so you don't want to just have them fall on their face every time, but you want to challenge them. But then you want to make sure that they're leaving that exercise with success, with some successful repetitions.
Awesome. So Steve, we're just about out of time, but I wanted to find out from you, there's a lot of great things that you've shared with everyone. If there is one thing that you could give to a salesperson tomorrow to say, try this to start being better prepared, what would it be?
Beyond that process that I talked about, the one thing I would say is consider the human factors. Meaning, a lot of times we get so driven by our agenda, so driven by our narrative that we want to, you, the client, the prospect, is you need to hear what I have to say. I've got to get this out. And we lose sight of the long game. We lose sight of the fact that we're really in service of that person. And so we go in there with the first thought being, you've got to hear this, when really what we should be doing is sitting there and coming in and soaking up the situation. What is going on right now? What is my level of situational understanding here? What is, I talked to the same friend who's, she actually finished at the top of her division for her pharmaceutical company. And I was like, what are you doing that's making you successful? What are you not doing? What are you doing that other people aren't doing? And she says, it's about going in there and remembering that it's my job to give them what they need. So she gives the example of, she walks in one day at a scheduled sales call with a doctor, and she sees, before she walks in, she sees all these patients lined up outside the door. And she goes in there and she can see the doctor is a little stressed, a little flustered. And she says hi. And then she says, you know what? I see that you're very busy today, and now is not a good time. I'm going to come back later. And he says, no, I can squeeze it in. He's like, no. She's like, no, take care of your patients. I'll leave you the material and we'll reschedule. And that is in view of, that's really saying, I understand, I'm valuing this as a relationship, and I'm keeping the long view, and I'm letting the relationship take priority over this narrative that I feel compelled to drive.
That is, it's funny that I've done a couple of these interviews so far. One of them was with Robin Dreek, who is the FBI behavioral analyst for the counterterrorism unit there. And he talks about trust and building relationships. And one of the things that we both agree on, it's why I have the t-shirt that says it's not about me, because that's the keys to building trust and relationships. And that's exactly what your friend did there. Is it wasn't about her and her agenda. I need to have this appointment and get this sale. It was being present in the moment and making it not about her that actually probably won her the deal in the end.
100%.
Yeah. Stephen, thank you so much for joining us today. Valuable lessons here, what sales can learn from a Navy SEAL about being prepared. And I think it's something that we can apply to probably every aspect of our lives. I'm really looking forward to maybe some continued conversations, and I will include some links where everybody can follow Stephen, follow him on Twitter, get more nuggets of wisdom as things start to progress. And thank you again.
Thank you, Carol. It was fun. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Thanks.